The road had no name, only a long stretch of cracked asphalt swallowed by darkness. Ethan stood beside his silent car, hazard lights blinking weakly like a pulse struggling to survive. His phone showed one bar of signal, then none. The engine had died without warning, leaving him stranded miles from the nearest town, with night settling in fast and cold that he hugged his jacket closer and exhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. This trip was supposed to clear his head. A few days away, a long drive, space to think. Lately, thinking felt heavier than working, heavier than silence. Back home, Mark would be waiting, probably annoyed, probably distracted. Their conversations had become efficient, like schedules instead of feelings. Ethan hadn't known how to say that loneliness could exist even when someone shared your bed. A gust of wind pushed through the trees lining the road, making them whisper like witnesses. Ethan glanced down the empty stretch behind him, then ahead. No headlights. No sound. Just the steady tick of cooling metal from his car and the awareness that he was truly alone. That he was considering walking when headlights finally appeared, distant but real. Relief surged, followed by caution. The vehicle slowed as it approached, then pulled over several feet behind him. A pickup truck. The engine cut off, and a man stepped out. "Everything okay?" the stranger asked, keeping his distance. Ethan nodded, then shook his head. "Car died. I think it's the battery. Or worse." The man moved closer, hands visible, voice calm. "I'm Daniel. I live a few miles up the road. Cell service is bad out here." Ethan introduced himself, aware of how tight his voice sounded. Daniel inspected the car briefly, tried the ignition, then straightened with a small frown. "You're not going anywhere tonight. I can call a tow in the morning. You can stay at my place if you want." The offer hung between them. Ethan hesitated, weighing fear against fatigue. The cold decided for him. "Thank you," he said quietly. The drive to Daniel's house was short but silent, broken only by the sound of tires on gravel. Ethan watched the road pass, feeling the strange release that came with surrendering control. When they arrived, the house was modest, lights glowing warmly against the dark. It didn't feel like a trap. It felt lived in. Inside, Daniel offered coffee, then settled for tea when Ethan declined. They spoke in fragments at first, where they worked, how long they'd lived nearby. Daniel was a mechanic, recently on his own. Ethan said he worked remotely, which was true but incomplete. He didn't mention Mark. Not yet. The warmth seeped back into his hands. Ethan noticed how safe he felt. Not excited. Not threatened. Just, at ease. Daniel didn't pry or fill the air with noise. He listened. That alone felt unfamiliar. "You can take the couch," Daniel said. "Bathrooms down the hall." Ethan thanked him again, surprised by how grateful he felt for something so simple. As Daniel disappeared into another room, Ethan sat alone, staring at the muted television, thinking about how easily the night had shifted. An hour ago, he'd been stuck on a road with no plan. Now he was sheltered by a stranger who owed him nothing. Lying on the couch later, Ethan stared at the ceiling, sleep refusing to come. His thoughts drifted back to Mark, to the half-finished arguments, the apologies that changed nothing, the quiet distance that had grown between them without either noticing. He wondered when comfort had replaced connection, and when he'd stopped fighting that trade. From down the hall, he heard Daniel move, the sound of a door closing gently. It struck Ethan how much he noticed small things tonight: tone, pauses, kindness. Things he used to notice all the time, before routine dulled them. The house settled into silence. Outside, the wind softened, and the road that had trapped him faded into darkness. Ethan closed his eyes, aware that this unexpected pause in his life felt important, though he didn't yet know why. That he only knew that when morning came, he wouldn't leave unchanged. Morning arrived without relief. Adam woke before the alarm, his thoughts already active, circling the same uneasy truths he had avoided the night before. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that invited reflection rather than rest. He lay still, listening to Mark's breathing beside him, and felt the sharp contrast between physical closeness and emotional distance. Nothing visible had changed, yet Adam sensed that the foundation beneath their marriage had shifted. Over breakfast, Adam spoke less than usual. Mark noticed but said nothing, perhaps out of habit, perhaps out of fatigue. Their routines continued as they always had, coffee poured, doors closed, goodbyes exchanged, but the familiarity felt fragile now, like something that could crack under a careless word. Adam watched Mark leave and wondered how long silence could serve as protection before it turned into betrayal. Ethan stayed out of sight for the next few days, which only intensified Adam's awareness of him. Absence proved more disruptive than presence. Adam replayed their conversation, the careful way Ethan had offered him a choice rather than an escape. That restraint haunted him. It made Adam question his own motives, the quiet longing that had drawn him towards someone who asked so little yet seemed to understand so much. When they finally met again, it was unplanned. Adam was returning home early, his thoughts scattered, when he found Ethan in the hallway. There was no pretense this time, no small talk to soften the moment. They exchanged a brief greeting, and Adam felt the tension settle between them, familiar and unresolved. Ethan spoke first, his tone steady but sincere. He acknowledged the risk of what they were doing, the cost it could carry for both of them. He said he didn't want to become a secret that damaged a life already under strain. The words struck Adam with unexpected force, because they echoed the doubts he had tried to ignore. Ethan wasn't offering romance or rescue, only honesty. Adam responded with more truth than he intended. He admitted that the distance in his marriage had left him feeling invisible, that being seen again had felt like a reminder of something he'd lost. He did not excuse his feelings, but he did not deny them either. Saying the words aloud made them real in a way thoughts never had. They parted without resolution, but not without understanding. Adam returned to his apartment aware that clarity, not temptation, was now his greatest challenge. He could no longer pretend that nothing had happened. Emotional lines, once crossed, did not reset simply because no one was watching. That evening, Mark asked a question he had avoided for weeks. He wanted to know whether Adam was still happy. The simplicity of it left Adam unprepared. He considered offering reassurance, the practiced answer that would preserve peace, but something in him resisted. For the first time in a long while, Adam chose honesty, even though it frightened him. That he spoke carefully, acknowledging the distance between them without assigning blame. Mark listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Adam finished, the space between them felt heavier, but also more real. Mark admitted he had felt the change too, though he hadn't known how to name it. There was pain in his voice, but also a willingness to confront what they had both avoided. The conversation did not resolve their marriage, but it altered its direction. They agreed to take time, to talk more, to listen differently, to stop pretending that stability alone was enough. Adam did not mention Ethan by name, but the shadow of that truth lingered, unspoken yet present. Later, alone in his room, Adam reflected on the choices unfolding before him. Infidelity, he realized, was not defined by a single act, but by the gradual turning away from one truth toward another. He stood at a crossroads shaped by desire, honesty, and consequence, unsure which path would demand more courage. As night settled in, Adam understood that change had already begun, not because of what had happened, but because of what could no longer be ignored. Whatever came next would require him to decide who he wanted to be, not in secret, but in the open light of accountability. The room was the same, the silence familiar, yet Adam sensed that the story was far from over. The second night passed without incident, yet it carried a weight Ethan could not ignore. He slept lightly, aware of every sound, every thought. By morning, clarity arrived not as relief but as resolve. Whatever had drawn him to Daniel was real, but it was also a mirror, reflecting what he had been avoiding. Daniel was already outside when Ethan woke, hood raised on the car, tools laid out with practiced care. The sight grounded Ethan. This was real life again, decisions, consequences, movement forward. It should start now, Daniel said after tightening the last bolt. He wiped his hands and stepped back. "You're good to go." Ethan thanked him, then hesitated. The urge to delay lingered, but he knew better than to indulge it. "Daniel," he said, "can we talk?" They sat on the porch steps, morning sun warming the wood beneath them. Ethan chose his words carefully, aware that honesty was overdue. "What happened here, it mattered to me. More than I expected." Daniel nodded slowly. "It mattered to me too. That's the problem," Ethan continued. "I came here already divided. And I don't want to carry this any further without facing what I've been running from." Daniel's gaze was steady, understanding rather than disappointed. "I won't be your escape," he said. "You deserve more than that. So does the man waiting for you." The mention of Mark tightened Ethan's chest. For the first time, the name didn't feel distant, it felt necessary. "I owe him the truth," Ethan said. "Even if it changes everything." They stood, the moment complete without needing more. Their goodbye was quiet, sincere, and restrained. No promises were made. None were needed. The drive home felt longer than the road that had stranded him. With each mile, Ethan rehearsed the conversation ahead, knowing there was no version that wouldn't hurt. When he finally walked through the door, Mark looked up from the couch, relief flickering across his face before concern settled in. "You okay?" Mark asked. Ethan nodded. "Physically. But we need to talk." They sat across from each other, the familiar distance now impossible to ignore. Ethan spoke carefully, not about Daniel's house or the road, but about himself, about feeling unseen, about the quiet erosion of connection, about realizing he'd been emotionally absent long before he ever left town. "I didn't cheat," Ethan said. "But I realized I could. And that scared me enough to stop pretending." Mark listened in silence, the truth landing harder than any accusation. "So what now?" he asked. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But I don't want to live on autopilot anymore." The conversation didn't end in resolution. It ended in honesty, raw and uncertain. They agreed to take time, to confront what they'd ignored. Whether that meant repair or release remained unclear. Later, alone, Ethan thought of the dark road and the stranger who had offered him shelter. Daniel hadn't changed his life, he had interrupted it long enough for Ethan to see it clearly. Sometimes, it wasn't the person you met that altered your path, it was the moment you were forced to stop and look around. Ethan stood by the window, watching evening settle in, different from the night he'd been stranded. This time, he wasn't lost. He was simply at the beginning of a harder, truer journey, one that demanded honesty, no matter where it led. Time did not rush to smooth things over. Instead, it moved with deliberate patience, forcing me to sit with what had happened rather than escape it. In the weeks after my conversation with Daniel, I noticed how carefully I began arranging my days, as if structure could prevent memory from intruding. Work filled my mornings, long walks filled my evenings, and silence occupied the spaces in between. Mark remained unchanged, or at least he appeared to be. He called occasionally, asked how I was doing, talked about ordinary things, errands, repairs, plans that extended comfortably into the future. Each conversation reminded me how fragile trust could be, how easily it could be damaged without anyone realizing it had been tested. I listened more than I spoke, grateful and uneasy at the same time. Daniel faded from my daily life, though not from my thoughts. We didn't meet again, and our contact dwindled to nothing. It felt intentional on both sides, a quiet agreement to let distance do the work we could not. I wondered often how he was managing, whether he had followed through on the resolve he voiced in that cafe. But wondering was all I allowed myself. Reaching out would have reopened something better left undisturbed. What surprised me most was how the experience sharpened my understanding of myself. I had always believed that knowing who I was meant knowing who I loved, what I wanted, and what I would never accept. The camping trip challenged that certainty. It showed me how easily loneliness could disguise itself as connection, and how validation could feel like intimacy even when it wasn't earned honestly. One evening, while sorting through old photos on my phone, I came across pictures from the trip. Trees silhouetted against a gray sky. A fire reduced to glowing embers. No faces. No evidence of the tension that had lived just outside the frame. I stared at them longer than I expected, then deleted them all, not out of anger, but out of recognition. Some memories serve better as lessons than keepsakes. Months passed. Life expanded again, slowly but steadily. I met new people, formed connections that were uncomplicated and open. Each interaction felt cleaner, unburdened by secrecy. I found myself more willing to speak up when something felt uncertain, less inclined to linger in gray areas that offered comfort without clarity. Still, the story stayed with me, not as a source of shame, but as a reminder. It taught me that boundaries are rarely tested by obvious danger. More often, they are challenged by familiarity, kindness, and the illusion of mutual understanding. The most difficult choices, I learned, are the ones that don't feel wrong until much later. The last time I saw Daniel was at a distance, at a gathering I attended briefly before leaving early. Our eyes met across the room, and in that brief moment, there was recognition without invitation. He nodded once, respectfully. I returned the gesture, grateful for the simplicity of it. No words were needed. What had passed between us belonged firmly in the past. As I walked away that night, I felt something close to peace. Not because everything had been resolved perfectly, but because I had chosen not to let a moment define me beyond its lesson. Growth, I realized, often comes quietly, disguised as restraint rather than action. Looking forward, I carry that awareness with me. I am more cautious now, but also more confident in my ability to step back when necessary. The memory of that tent, that trip, that almost choice remains, but it no longer pulls at me. It stands behind me, a marker of where I learned to choose integrity over impulse, and though the story ends here, the understanding it gave me continues, shaping the way I move through the world, steadier, clearer, and far more honest than before.